in March 2020. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Ambassador, Congressman, colleagues, friends, Carlos, thank you. I'm pleased to join you here today for the opening of these two powerful exhibitions that are looking at some of the greatest challenges facing out our region. The history, culture, and life of our hemisphere is breathtaking. The stories of our people are intertwined with the experiences of hope, tragedy, and of triumph. These experiences are reflected in and communicated through the work of great artists who have memorialized our history. Artistic expression and the freedom of expression are among our most fundamental civil and political rights. It is only right to let people give voice to their thoughts and beliefs and communicate their ideas. It is how we all express our identity, tell our stories, and share our experiences. This is a right that is enshrined in both the Inter-American Declaration of Human Rights and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is also reaffirmed in the Democratic Charter as not only the right to hold our own ideas, but to listen and hear the ideas of others and share information freely and without interference. It is also the right that protects us when we need to speak up against injustice. These works of art are powerful and uncomfortable. They show the work of artists who struggle to communicate the heartbreak and fear they experience living under dictatorship, that not only disregard the suffering of their people, but also its very cause. In Venezuela, the country has come under the weight of an totalitarian regime that has been willing to devastate the country in order to hold into power. Widespread schemes of grand corruption and systematic gross mismanagement has created unprecedented migration and humanitarian crisis. Citizens have been subject to widespread abuses and crimes against humanity as the rule of law has been all but eliminated. The art here shows as a mere shadow of the vibrant people and cities that once made up Venezuela. The Cuban people, these images are voices shouting to be heard. The freedom of expression has long been a challenge in the country, and journalists have long faced a reality of arbitrary detention and torture for documenting and publicizing anything perceived to be critical of the revolution. The 2018 Decree 349, imposed by the Cuban regime, sought to silence those who aim to communicate through art. It required government approval for an artist, musician, writer, or performer to share their work, empowering government officials to shut down performances and cite exhibits at will, or in the name of protecting Cuban revolutionary values. The past August, threatened by a population who showed the courage to protest, they introduced a decree certified that effectively seeks to shut down the internet when anything affects the public morality or respect of public order, once again in the name of the revolution. This was a revolution fought in the name and spirit of empowering the people. And now its intent is silencing and erasing the experiences of those within. The audience is proud to support the exercise of freedom of expression today with a moving collection of humans. Art and these artistic voices are needed more than ever to protect the civic space and entrance democracy, not to mention exposing the truths of oppression. I would like to acknowledge each of the artists who have contributed to these two exhibits. We thank you for your courage and sharing your experiences with us. I would also like to acknowledge the artists in Cuba that remain in jail after the July protest, including Luis Manuel de Alcántara, whose images are among those included in this work. We must seize every opportunity to promote their art and their ideas. This commitment is of the utmost urgency when we are speaking of the people of Cuba and Venezuela, whose government seek to stamp out these voices and prevent their people from sharing their experiences with the world. We must make clear that this type of restrictions not only serve to suffocate creative freedom of the people of the Americas, but they are a violation of their fundamental rights. It is an honor to stand with you today as artists, as politicians, diplomats, and private individuals who are dedicated to the preservation and restoration of the fundamental freedoms that are the core to what makes us who we are as people. I would also like to acknowledge the hard work of Carlos Ponce and the victims of Communist Foundation and Monica Leroy in bringing these exhibitions together, as well as the contributions of the Umbrella Art Foundation and our staff here at the Art Museum of the Americas for their technical assistance in bringing these exhibitions to life. Estas imágenes que vemos acá, cada una contiene el dolor de los pueblos, contiene la esperanza de la gente, contiene el deseo de luchar por la libertad. Cada una de estas imágenes nos muestra lo fracasado de dos sistemas revolucionarios, entre comillas, porque ninguna revolución puede dejar a la gente con menos derechos que antes. Cada una de estas fotografías es la fiel imagen del fracaso de esas revoluciones, del fracaso de esos sistemas y del dolor que esos sistemas causan a sus pueblos. Cada una de estas fotografías nos gritan democracia, nos gritan libertad. Y por cada una de estas fotografías, por cada una de las personas fotografiadas, por cada uno de los artistas que han documentado esto, debemos redoblar todos en cada lugar en que estemos nuestro esfuerzo de que los pueblos de Venezuela y Cuba vuelvan a ser libres. Gracias. Bravo, 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 bravo.
Thank you very much, Secretary General, for those powerful words.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Now I would like to welcome Lisa Peterson, Acting Assistant Secretary, Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor. Lisa joined the U.S. Foreign Service in 1989. She joined the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary December 2020. On January 20th, 2021, she began serving as the Acting Assistant Secretary for DRL. She served as the senior official for security, democracy, and human rights from January 20th to July 14th, 2021. Thank you very much.
Dear colleagues and friends, it's an honor to be here with you tonight as we memorialize the plight of our Cuban and Venezuelan brothers and sisters. The Veil of Silence and Venezuela Resist are not just the titles of the exhibits we celebrate tonight. They illustrate the voices demanding freedom and democracy in Cuba and Venezuela today. In Cuba, the world has witnessed historic, spontaneous demonstrations that manifest the unmet needs and aspirations of the Cuban people. This past July, Cubans broke the veil of silence with their voices to peacefully demand the regime recognize and respect their human rights and fundamental freedoms. In response, Cuban security forces violently repressed the peaceful protests, arresting hundreds of demonstrators simply for finding their voice. The regime's lack of respect for human rights and the repression against dissenting voices continue. The regime refuses to allow the planned November 15 peaceful protests to go ahead while threatening both organizers and would-be demonstrators. Instead of listening to its people, the regime continues to detain hundreds of pro-democracy activists, journalists, and protesters, and seeks to further silence independent voices through summary trials that do not respect full fair trial guarantees, imposing sentences of up to 27 years in prison while condemning others to exile. We have urged the Cuban regime to listen to the voices of the Cuban people, calling for dignity, prosperity, and freedom. This exhibit serves as a testament to the state of crisis in which Cuba finds itself, including the ongoing healthcare crisis. The pictures humanize the cruel conditions faced by political prisoners like Luis Manuel Otero Alcantara and Michael Castillo, who are imprisoned for peacefully expressing their freedom of expression. July marked a decisive moment for the Cuban regime, an opportunity to show the world what it truly stands for. Cubans deserve and are due their human rights and fundamental freedoms, such as the ability to exercise these rights and peacefully voice their aspirations without fear of violence or imprisonment. The United States stands firmly with the Cuban people, including their right to assemble peacefully, express their grievances, and ultimately freely choose their leadership and their future. In Venezuela, the Maduro regime continues its human rights abuses against the Venezuelan people. This exhibit shows the deteriorating quality of life, infrastructure, health system, and the overall socio-political environment in Venezuela. Human rights defenders such as Javier Tarazona continue to pay a price as one of the many political prisoners still wrongfully imprisoned for championing human rights and fundamental freedoms. All this while just last month we saw Maduro and his cronies walk away from critical negotiations with the Unity Platform. By suspending these talks, Maduro is signaling to the international community that he values his own interests above the welfare of the millions of Venezuelans yearning for democracy, greater freedom, prosperity, and at the most basic level, an alleviation of the humanitarian suffering that the regime continues to inflict on them. This exhibit confirms what we all know. Communism is a failed system of government. These authoritarian regimes strip people of their human rights and fundamental freedoms, and at their worst, lead to such violations as extrajudicial killings, disappearances, and arbitrary detentions. They also foster corruption, deprivation, and other forms of oppression. Therefore, as we all reflect on these exhibitions, I hope you will join me in calling for the immediate, unconditional release of all political prisoners in both Cuba and Venezuela, and to continue working together to promote the spread of human rights, freedom, and democracy. Thank you very much.
Y se encuentra. Eliezer Márquez Guani, participant known as El Punk, Cuban rapper born in Havana, Cuba, November 14, 1981. The influence for his music comes from hip hop and English. Such artists as Tupac, Dr. Dre, Redman, among others. El Punk began to identify with these alternative genres thanks to the rap clubs that took place in the House of Culture of Old Havana, very near his house, where he has had his first encounters with Cuban rap. He's best known for this year's great work, Patria y Vida, where he sang from Cuba and performed in a video together with Michael Osongo and Luis Manuel Otero Alcántara, both who are part of the prisoners of conscience in Cuba today. Without further ado, El Punk, ¿la busca en inglés o? Okay, and I'll be translating to English for him.
Súper contento de estar aquí con ustedes, en representación de mis hermanos, de todos esos jóvenes, de todas esas personas que estuvieron día 11. Y más que todo, desde aquí, desde el país de la libertad, seguir apoyando. Y lo más grande es que pueda estar ahí en la organización del programa.
I'm very happy to be here.
Estoy súper contento de estar aquí. Súper nervioso también, ahora mismo.
I'm very happy to be here with you today, and also in name of all those young people who went out on July 11th and with the movements inside of Cuba. I'm also very happy that I'll be able to be representing the Grammys.
Y va a ser un momento oportuno para, aparte de cantar Patria y Vida, dedicarle ese premio, aunque ya están nominados a un premio grandísimo, a todo el pueblo de Cuba, a todos los sufridos y a todos los que están presos. Gracias, de verdad.
It will be wonderful to be performing Patria y Vida during the Grammys and to dedicate that award to the Cuban people.
Y como digo yo, la pelea continúa y Patria y Vida.
And as I say, the struggle continues, homeland and life. Thank you. Also joining us from Cuba is Anameli Ramos of the San Isidro movement, a Cuban art curator and activist. She's one of the most visible faces of the San Isidro movement. Graduate from the University of Havana as an art historian. She worked 12 years as a professor and researcher at the Higher Institute of Art, from which she was expelled. Since January 10, 2021, she has been studying a doctorate in anthropology at the Ibero-American University in Mexico. Anameli herself assured that the repressors who harassed her warned her that there was no future for her in Cuba and asked her for her own good to leave the country so that she would stop being a problem for them. Anameli was among the MSI activists who, in November of 2020, were engaged in a protest at the San Isidro Movement headquarters in Havana, when that headquarters was raided by the secret police, and they taken to different places and silenced temporarily, because hundreds of artists went to the Ministry of Culture demanding their freedom and demanding rights to freedom of expression in Cuba. Without further ado, Anameli Ramos.
Hola, buenas tardes a todos, un placer estar acá y estar también con los hermanos venezolanos. Yo creo que el problema de Cuba ahora mismo rebasa las fronteras de nuestro país se ha convertido en un problema mundial porque en última instancia es una cuestión de vida, ¿no? Justo como dice la canción.
I'm very glad to be with you here today and also be here with my Venezuelan brothers and sisters because this is a problem that transcends borders. It's a problem that has to do with homeland and life.
Estas fotos que están aquí en la sala donde nos encontramos pertenecen a una serie de desmanes donde él imaginaba posibles muertes y posibles causas penales que podría abrir el Estado justamente por su activismo político.
These photos that you see here in this space are by Luis Manuel Otero Alcantara. Imagine the different ways he could be killed by the secret police and also the criminal cases that could be brought against him.
Y en la sala de al lado se ven esas fotos reales de pacientes en Cuba y de la situación sanitaria terrible en que viven. Lo que llama la atención es cómo la realidad y la ficción se mezclan en el caso cubano, justamente porque es alucinante el terror y la miseria y la precariedad a que ese Estado nos ha llevado.
And in the adjoining space, there are pictures of patients, Cuban patients in precarious and poor health situations in the island. And it's interesting how you're seeing this mixture of fiction and reality in the horror of the repression and the existence that Cubans are suffering.
El autor de estas fotos es Angelo Torres, que fue uno de los que hizo el video en la parte cubana, el video de la canción Patria y Vida. Y entonces, de alguna manera, hay como una unión, ¿no? Entre las artes plásticas, el arte que puedo ver de Manuel, la realidad tan cruda que se vive en Cuba, la canción Patria y Vida. Y en estas fotos y en las fotos de la sala contigua está representado toda la crudeza de la realidad cubana.
These photos that you're seeing here were taken by the individual who did the video for Patria y Vida, showing Luis Manuel Otero Alcantara, Funky, Michael Castillo Soto. And in these photos, and in the photos next door, you can see the cruel, crude reality that exists in Cuba.
Dedicar todo lo que se está haciendo, no solo la exposición, sino nuestra presencia en Estados Unidos, a los 800 o más de presos políticos que ahora mismo tiene Cuba, a sus madres, que muchas veces no saben en qué condiciones se encuentran, a Michael Castillo, por supuesto, autor de la canción Patria y Vida, que debería estar con nosotros hoy, a Luis Manuel, a Esteban, que se arriesgó tanto también por la canción en las calles, a las personas que ahora mismo están en huelga de hambre por sus derechos en Cuba, Virgilio Mantilla, un preso político colombiano, negro, y que quede siempre claro que la discriminación en Cuba es parte de la represión, es una de los canales, de las vías en que la represión se hace posible, se hace efectiva, y que nuestra lucha en última instancia no es solo contra la dictadura, sino también porque esa discriminación termine y porque todos podamos tener vida en abundancia.
We are here, we're dedicated for the over 800 plus political prisoners currently in Cuba arrested back in July of 2021, to their mothers, who in many cases do not know the situations they're in. Obviously, we are also here for Michael Castillo Osobo, for Luis Manuel Otero Alcantara, for Esteban, who did so many things who took so many risks to get the song Patria y Vida out in the community. And we are also here for Virgilio Mantilla, a Black Camagüeyano, who is engaged currently on a hunger strike, and also the others engaged in hunger strike for their freedom. Thank you very much. Annelies Casanova, visual artist and Umbrella Art Foundation representative. She was born in the countryside of Artemisa, Cuba. She's a professional graphic designer with over 10 years of experience. Since 2013, she's been creating a series of human rights and political posters about the freedom of Cuba, the opposition, and Cuba's reality. Please.
Thank you all for being here. I'll be speaking on behalf of Umbrella Art Foundation in English. And before I begin, so I would like to invite my worker, Ana Lema, who accompanied me by my side. So, and Vivian Santos. Thank you for this opportunity of free speech. The following words are from Umbrella Art Foundation. Ana Lema, Vivian Santos, and yours truly, Annalise Casanova. Communism is death, brutality, and repression. Cuba suffers communism and symptoms without exception. Cuba is not only, there's not only persecution, harassment, torture, and political prisons, but also Cubans live in a collapsed system with disastrous consequences. The propaganda around the myth of the great Cuban medical power is one of the most deeply rooted in the imaginary of the international left in the world, making it a great challenge to refute it, such an ideological legend. However, the monopolization of the communist health system has ended up becoming a true social blackmail at the hands of the dictatorship, which has used it without discrimination against peaceful dissidents, with examples as the inoculation of the HIV virus, injecting unknown agents into their bodies, denying assistance to those who are on hunger strike, and prohibiting autopsies. Therefore, all healthcare falls under the hands of the communist regime, which makes the totalitarian state the sole provider of life and death. The extreme decline of this model affects Cuban citizens in general, becoming a sort of apartheid in which hordes of foreigners are prioritized over national civilians. On the other hand, healthcare in Cuba is not free. By comparing wages against prices in medicine, if they are for sale, most Cubans cannot afford them. A retired senior spends most of his meager checkbook on his medications alone. Which brings us to the fact that the elderly in Cuba is one of the hardest hit. The nursing homes are true houses of horror, negligence, abuse, and abandonment. The Cuban regime sells the image of effectiveness of its health protocols to combat the coronavirus pandemic. But the levels of infections and death have soared so far this year to record numbers. Cuba ranks first in Latin America and fourth in the world in numbers of infections per 100,000 inhabitants. Just let that sink in. Another fundamental fact is the false humanistic character of the medical missions. More than 600 Cuban doctors recently gave testimony against the Cuban government. And we have to thank victims of communism for being very active in this matter. Without extending us more, the totalitarian horror encompasses the life of every Cuban civilian from 1959 until today. That is why, Umbrella Art Foundation, we believe that through art and culture, the dehumanizing nature of the health system can be firmly documented. We deeply appreciate Ana Lema, the artist and curator of this event, Vivian Santos, the general producer, and myself, Annalise Casanova, the opportunity and the great trust victims of communism has in us, especially Yuri Perez, who has been of great help, and Carlos, and Vivian. The Art Museum of the Americas, and the co-curator of this great exhibition, Valia Garzon, who is a great friend and patriot. To Antonio Correa, who has produced a theoretical text based on this exhibition, and to the Organized American States, the Organization of American States, and all the politicians present. To Almagro, of course, but especially to artists, some in prison like Luis Manuel Otero Alcantara. To each of them, thank you. We want to also give a special thanks to the influencers here as well, especially our guests. We believe that the truth sets us straight. For this reason, we ask that some of you please who have a QR fan at your hands, scan it so that we may take a look without fear and filters at the Cuban raw reality, and we invite everyone else to please grab a fan if you wish to. We have so much to do and we must do it now.
Paz y vida. Paz y vida. Bravo por el 11 de julio. Bravo. Libertad para Cuba. Y abajo al comunismo.
Abajo.
We have Laura Ortiz from the office of Senator Marco Rubio, away from Cuba. Thank you.
Dear friends, in advance, I apologize for not being able to join you today in the opening of this contemporary art exhibition organized by Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. I want to express my gratitude to Secretary General Luis Almagro for hosting this event in the AMA Museum and for his continued commitment to exposing the truth about Cuba and Venezuela during his tenure. After the historic July 11 protests in Cuba, the world watched with admiration as an entire island joined the clamor for Paz y Vida. The tenacity of the Cuban people reaffirmed the desire to break free from decades of criminal dictatorship, which actively represses, censors, and arbitrarily undermines basic human rights. The tragedy endured by the people of Venezuela under the Maduro narco regime is evidence of how a totalitarian regime subjects its citizens to unimaginable living conditions and systematic destruction. Thank you to the many artists, including members of the San Isidro movement present here today, who through their art are depicting the reality of what it is like to live under tyranny in both Cuba and Venezuela. Que Dios los bendiga. Marco Rubio.
Thank you so much.
Well, please, for the next 10 minutes, have a mojito, enjoy a sandwich. We should be joined by our Congress people, Maria Vida Salazar, and Mario Pilar, in 10 to 15 minutes. Thank you very much.
At this hour in the Americas, millions and millions of citizens can be trampled by dictators who rule with impunity. For instance, in Mexico City, a tyrant who should be shunned by the entire world was welcomed as if he were a statesman. Mexican President AMLO, López Obrador, received Cuban dictator Díaz-Canel as a guest of honor, a gesture not even Fidel Castro enjoyed on Mexican soil in 60 years of tyranny. It was a sickening example and a worse spectacle. And the Biden administration, where was the Biden administration? Silent. This summer, a few weeks ago, when the Cuban people bravely took to the streets to protest against the thugs who hold power in Cuba, this administration, the Biden administration, ignored their cries. They sat quietly as goons, beat those who yearn for freedom. But Biden's failure to act is not only in Cuba. Venezuela is being ignored while its people are starving. The Biden administration eliminated the role of special envoy for Venezuela at the State Department. What does that tell you? By eliminating that position, that Venezuela is not a priority. In Nicaragua, there will be a sham election 5 days from today. Daniel Ortega has made a mockery of the United States by jailing 7 presidential candidates. Many of them honorable people. One of them is Arturo Cruz, who was my first husband. I know him very well. They have jailed him for treason. In the darkness, he's not been able to eat healthy food, read any books, or see his family. What's going to happen to him and the 6 others who are in jail? I don't know. But I know the patriotism he has for his country, for Nicaragua. The time he has invested making it a democracy. He is not a traitor. He was just a presidential contender. But thank God we are here in the company of someone who speaks loud and clear, whom I just met when I was coming into this room. Secretary General Luis Almagro, who invited us to this event. He is not afraid to speak and denounce the satanic nightmare that has engulfed this region. He has unmasked the brutalities of the Castro regime, the most cruel, evil, sadistic subjugation the American, the Cuban has seen since the arrival of Christopher Columbus in 1492. And he has been also there for the Venezuelans and for the Nicaraguans. Su secretario general, si usted me está escuchando, déjeme decirle en nombre de los cubanos, los venezolanos, los nicaragüenses y todos los latinos que yo represento como representante federal del Congreso Federal por el distrito número 27 de la ciudad de Miami, el corazón del exilio cubano en los Estados Unidos, muchas gracias por su solidaridad, por ser valientes, por levantar la voz de millones de compatriotas, por todo el mundo que ha sufrido esta pesadilla, empezando por mi padre y todos mis ancestros, una pesadilla que no termina. Secretary General Almagro, you once called Cuba el ejemplo más perfecto de la mitología, the perfect example of mythology. Today, this exhibition dispels any misconceptions about life under the Castro tyranny. It dispels any lingering mythology, the mythology that life in Cuba is paradise. It is all but misery. This exhibition is called El Ropaje del Silencio, the veil of silence. It couldn't be described any better. The message around these walls is loud and clear. The Cuban people will be silent no more. The Cubans are crying for freedom. Se quitaron el ropaje y están levantando un clamor por la libertad. This regime is failed. This is a failed system. El sistema castrista es un sistema derrotado y fracasado. The system where government thugs will beat their own people into submission just to retain power. How cruel, how sad that it fell upon us, the Cubans, upon my parents and my ancestors. Where dreams are strangled by a system that knows only obedience to power. Un sistema en el que se ahogan los sueños porque lo único que permite es la obediencia al poder. Millions of people have heard the song Patria Vida and learned of the suffering of the Cuban people through its lyrics. It's marvelous that through art, we learn what Cubans are thinking. It says, no más mentiras, mi pueblo pide libertad, no más doctrinas, ya no gritemos patria o muerte, sino gritemos patria vida. Y empezar a construir lo que soñamos, lo que destruyeron nosotros los humanos. There is a guy by the name of Luis Manuel Otero Alcántaras, and through his work that has been smuggled out of Cuba from under the shackles of the regime, we see some of the pictures for the world to see. Here at the OAS, you are doing the work to expose Cuba's reign of terror throughout his arts. But that's not the only way to expose them. We need internet and connectivity to the island. And where is the Biden administration? Oh, I know it very well. Because the United States government needs to provide internet to the island of Cuba so that millions of voices like Alcántaras can share their pain with the rest of the world. With connectivity, with internet, we can remove the veil that shields the atrocities from the world for people to see what the captors are doing to its people. And I, as a member of Congress, once again, I have implored the Biden administration. I have talked to Secretary Blinken, to Emily Mandrella, to Juan Gonzalez, to create a plan to bring internet to the island. Ever since July 11th, I have asked for them to do their due diligence with those companies that have the most advanced technology in order to provide connectivity, in order to provide internet once ETEXA is shut down. I have met with administration officials who can get this done. We know the technology exists. We know it's there. We know the name of the company. We know where the company is. I have spoken with the CEO and with the owner of the company. I have begged the Biden administration to bring connectivity. That's the only thing I'm asking, connectivity. So everyone on November 15th will know that they are not alone, that they are with the rest of the people, that we are with them. No response. So now, in less than 2 weeks, the Cuban people will once again rise up against that oppression. So let's see what Biden is going to do. They can't say that we have not warned them, that we're going to have millions of Cubans, hopefully millions and millions of Cubans on the streets of Havana, shouting freedom. As a representative of the Cuban exile community, as I said before, we have explained this many times to the present administration. They cannot say that we did not program. Thank you. Appreciate it.
It is my honor to present Ambassador Andrew Berger, President and CEO of the Veterans Communist Memorial Foundation. Previously, Ambassador Berger served as a representative of the United States in the Office of the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva, Switzerland. Ambassador Berger.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for the Veterans Communism Memorial Foundation. We're extremely proud to help sponsor this important event. And I really want to personally thank Secretary General Alejandro and the OAS for making this event possible for all of us gathered here today. On July 11th, we witnessed the start of the largest protest movement seen in Cuba in decades. Thousands of Cubans took to the streets across the island in protest against the repression and corruption they have suffered for the past 62 years. They demanded freedom and chanted down with dictatorship, singing Patria Vida, a powerful message against the regime's communist rule. The communist regime has responded with further repression and violence. More than 1,000 people have been arrested and many have been subject to summary trials and have been forced disappearances, including Jose Daniel Ferrer, a recipient of Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation's own Truman Reagan Medal of Freedom. At activists and artists have been targeted for imprisonment, including Cuba's San Isidro movement, who were awarded DOC's Dissident Human Rights Award to mark Captain Nations Week this past July. Today, as we heard from Animale Ramos from San Isidro and Fongi, one of the Patria Vida singers, we're so thankful for their witness and the work they do every day. They are raising their voices for Luis Manuel Ferro who is one of the artists featured today in this important exhibit, and Michael Castillo Ozurgo, who are both in Cuban prisons, suffering terrible conditions. Of course, as we all know, we have seen the devastation that has wrought Venezuela for over 20 years. We have seen how quickly, in just 20 years, a brutal communist regime can devastate a prosperous land where freedom and democracy were flourishing. And we've seen firsthand how quickly this great prosperity can be lost and turned into suffering and agony for millions of people. We are grateful for the partnership with the United States government for helping support this important exhibit and for the OAS's Art Museum of the Americas for hosting this week. We hope that all who see it are inspired and moved to act. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men and women to do nothing. While dozens of countries have condemned the ongoing repression and lack of any meaningful multilateral response, the situation in Cuba and Venezuela is shameful. Member state governments and their people should be ashamed of the lack of tangible action taken across the international community to stand up for these basic universal values. The Cuban and Venezuelan people deserve to be supported in their courageous demand for freedom. There is an urgent need, but still an opportunity for both the United States and for all OAS member states to build a strong coalition to pressure the Cuban and Venezuelan regimes. And we must prepare, and we must be ready for whatever is the next big development, particularly what we may see in Cuba, whether it is the march scheduled for November 15th or some other event, I believe, in the near future. Few people could have predicted exactly how the events across Central and Eastern Europe in 1989 would have unfolded. It is up to us outside of Cuba and Venezuela to be prepared and to focus and do everything we can to provide direct support to civil society in Cuba and in Venezuela, to call for and demand the immediate release of all political prisoners, and to be prepared as an international community to take action and to hold these regimes accountable when they violate international law, when they violate human rights. Here with we, the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, will be opening the first museum dedicated to all victims of communism here in Washington, just 2 blocks north of the White House, here in Washington, D.C., in early 2022. Good night. Helping educate all of our visitors about the more than 100 million victims of communist regimes around the world and the more than 1.5 billion people still living under communism today. The museum will serve as an important platform for giving greater voice to Cuban and Venezuelan independent artists, human rights activists, and civil society. And we look forward to hosting this and other artistic displays at our own museum very soon next year. So thank you all very much for coming today. Thank you for other lessons.
Morning, this is a great pleasure to see you. Congressman Javier tomorrow. Please, Congressman Javier for this 23rd congressional district will be addressing us.
Thank you. See you. Good afternoon. Let me just, let me have your attention on that. I'm not going to speak very long. But I do want, if you would, please just attention for a few minutes. This is such an important day. Thank you all. Oh, sorry, by the way, I know that Jennifer saw that I said Mike is here. Funky, where is he? Are you still here? I thought he said Mike. See you back out. He said Funky. Funky was one of those that put that anthem of freedom, Patria, y vida together. It's a privilege to have him here. Oye, privilegio tenerte aquí. A este luchador por la libertad de Cuba, alguien que conoce lo que es la represión, pero también lo que es ponerse de pie y demandar libertad. Y no rendirse. Gracias por estar aquí. Qué privilegio tenerte entre nosotros en esta tierra de libertad. Thank you for him, for being here. I also know that the Secretary General of the OES was here. I think I got on the way out, and I do want to thank him. The victims of the Communism Foundation, the Center for Cuba, thank you for the work that you do. Andrew Brember, Master Brember, he just spoke that. There you are. I didn't recognize him in your mask. So thank you for the job that you do. The Art Museum of the OAS, and again, the Secretary of Camargo. And in particular, right, the Venezuelan and Cuban artists whose work we are here to watch and to take in and to admire. The Venezuelan artists of Venezuela resists. Images of tragedy, poignantly unveils the decline in every aspect of life in Venezuela. A hopeless man decries the unavailability of health care for those not connected to the regime. An elderly man pushes firewood, now an important fuel in oil-rich Venezuela. Shutter doors that reveal the side of those businesses that are now closed. And the Cuban artists of the veil of silence. It revealed that really the dehumanization, right, that occurs in today's communist Cuba. The body of a patient at a regime psychiatric hospital who was one of a dozen who died of all things of hypothermia. And then reveals injuries received before his death. And this haphazard little piece of paper note scribbled, which serves as his medical record. In the place that we heard medicine is supposed to be quality and free. No, Cubans are free of medical care because there is no medical care for true normal Cubans, as it shows. The exploration of ways that political activists imagine standing up to the regime for the ultimate sacrifice. The list of those who have left with the party of Cuba due to COVID, revealing the medical negligence, the deep, painful negligence suffered by Cubans, and the data that has been manipulated by the regime. See, this art has captured the soul crushing of communism, which attempts to break the spirit of the individual, the spirit of every individual, and denies the God-given dignity to each person by making that person subservient to the all-powerful state. We must continue to expose the horrors suffered by those languishing in communism, as this exhibit so vividly does. We must ensure that those of us who are blessed, privileged to live in freedom, fully understand the destruction that communism wreaks to an economy, the social fabric, and to the human soul. It is something that we must never forget, that we must continue to share. So which is why it's such a privilege and a deep honor to be with each and every one of you today, and for those of you who have made this possible. Thank you Thank you. Thank you. Freedom will prevail. It's up to us to do what we can. Thank you so much.
This concludes the program. However, I believe there are still some mojitos. Padre,